So we were having our Christmas Eve dinner. Turkey, stuffing, and other dishes that you'd expect to get at Thanksgiving. We don't have a big family. It was my grandparents and uncles from my mom's side of the family. At the time, we lived in a duplex with some guy and his girlfriend on the other side, though we never really saw them much. Strangely, we had a door that connected our sides, and no, that's not something most duplexes have. It had a very unique kind of lock, though. It had to be unlocked from both sides to be opened, and it could open in either direction. I only saw it open once before the two moved in, ever since the door had been locked, at least on our side. While we were sitting at the dinner table eating, the doorknob to the door that separates the sides of our duplex twisted and turned, before the lock could block it. It was not accidental, as it was going on for at least 10 seconds. My dad got up and walked over to the door, placed one hand on the lock and one hand on the doorknob. "You need something?" There was no answer. He unlocked our side of the door and swung it open. Their side of the duplex was completely pitch black, and it seemed as if nobody was home. It was only about 6 o'clock, and we were certain we saw them leaving earlier. Me and my dad went to check out the window, and their car was gone too. Being good neighbors, we assumed the worst, that there may have been an intruder. So me, my dad, and my uncle went to the other side to investigate. We flipped on all the lights and checked every corner and every crevice of the small first floor. Then we heard a thud and a crack from upstairs. There was pressure on the floorboards. I was freaked out, so I stayed behind while my dad and uncle ran upstairs. I felt my heart skip a beat when a huge commotion erupted from upstairs, before a scream from my uncle echoed across the duplex. Even to the other side, as my whole family got up from the table now. Moments later, my dad came rushing down with my uncle beside him, with his hand covering his lower shoulder or chest area. There was a stab wound. We all hurried back to our side of the apartment and locked the door. We dialed 911 and simultaneously heard rapid stomping coming from the other side, and then heavy banging and ramming into the door to the point where there were small chips and cracks forming. We could hear the grunting and screaming of the man as he rammed into the door. My other uncle and my dad each grabbed kitchen knives. I armed myself as well. They told all of us to stand back while they waited by the door. Thankfully, the man on the other side gave up before the door gave in, and we heard him exit out the front door. We all watched through the window, and we all saw his face as he ran through the snow and turned to see us through the glass. He took off in his black Honda Civic down the slushy roads. It doesn't end there. The following year, the same neighbors still lived there, and they seemed to be having a Christmas get-together with a few people. By chance, I was looking out my bedroom window, being a sketchy snoop, when I recognized one of their guests to be the same man who had allegedly broken into their side of the duplex. When I told my dad, he agreed, and we approached them about it. He denied any knowledge of what we said, and even our neighbors defended him, saying he was from out of state. There was nothing we could do for proof, but we knew one thing. Those neighbors, for whatever reason, set that up. We moved out about a month later, after our new-grown fear of those neighbors became too much. Did you ever used to have a fear of those guys that would dress up as Santa Claus in the malls or at Christmas parties? Up until the age of about 8, I certainly did. I think I was 6 or 7 years old when me and my mom were walking through the mall, with all the Christmas festivities and decorations up. Festive bands playing jingle bells, a giant tree in the center of the mall, and of course a mall Santa, covered by a green blanket. There was a small line of kids and parents waiting to sit on Santa's lap. Maybe 2 or 3 kids. My mom insisted I sit on his lap. Normally, it would be the other way around, the kid begging the parent to sit on the lap, but she knew how shy I was. There wasn't anyone by the mall Santa's side, like one of those people who calls the next child up. It was just him. When I sat on the stranger's lap, he grabbed me by the chest and said softly in my ear, "What do you want for Christmas?" I think I said a Game Boy Advance. He laughed and assured me I would receive one. Then, for whatever reason, my mom walks up to the Santa and said something quietly to him. He chuckled in response to whatever she said, and then said no problem. My mom told me to wait there by the Santa for a few minutes until she came back. At this point, there were no more kids waiting to sit on his lap, so his attention was directed at me. He told me to come over and sit on his lap again. I somehow obeyed, despite my fear of Santa Claus. When I sat on his lap, he pulled me closer to him so that my back was leaning on him. When I think back on this moment now, it's all the more painful and creepy. He then whispered in my ear that he had a Game Boy Advance outside by his sled, and if I followed him that I would get it right now and wouldn't have to wait until Christmas. My fear suddenly turned to excitement as I believed him. We both stepped off the chair, and I followed him down one of the exit hallways. But halfway through, he stopped and told me that we should take a bathroom break first. We stepped into the bathroom, and he quickly locked the door. I turned and looked at him as he looked at me, but before anything else could happen, there was a frantic banging at the door. Somebody on the other side was yelling to open up. The Santa opened the door, and a man pulled him out and shoved him. The man then escorted me back to the center of the mall, asking me where my mom went. I watched as the fake Santa casually walked out the exit door and out of my sight. When my mom came back, the man explained everything. I'm pretty sure he was watching the whole time. He and my mom asked around to see if the mall hired any mall Santas for the day. They did not. Whoever that was just a pervert dressed as a Santa to get kids to sit on his lap and possibly wait for a perfect opportunity to snatch one, just like he almost did to me. It was a cold December night a week before Christmas. My family always does Christmas in our Hamptons, New York summer house. The Hamptons are always quiet this time of year, as a large chunk of the real estate there is owned by rich people who have 2 or 3 houses elsewhere in the country. My dad and I were at the house first before the rest of my family, as my mom and sister still had work until the next weekend. My dad was retired at the time, and school was over for winter break for me, so we wanted to just go to the Hamptons house early. We all have our own bedrooms in this house, which sits on a quiet dead-end road. My dad turned on the heat and water, and all that stuff that has to be taken care of when we return for the first time in months. I brought my PS3 to play in my room. I spent most of the first day there playing video games. In that first night we were there was a big snowstorm. Another reason why we wanted to come early, to beat the crappy road conditions that would come for days after the storm. The next morning when I woke up and went out to the kitchen, my dad asked me when I built the snowman. I responded, "What do you mean?" He said the snowman in the backyard. I went to look out the window, and there was at least 2 feet of fresh snow. But there was also a snowman sitting in our backyard. It had 2 sticks for arms, angled up into the air, and it had eyes and a smile carved into the head. The eyes and mouth side was facing the window. I said to my dad that I didn't build that, My dad laughed and said that it must have been the neighbor's kid. My dad thought it was an innocent joke, so I did as well. The next night is where things got bad, though. I was in bed asleep, and suddenly woke up to a distinct thump on my window. I was terrified. I pulled the blankets over myself to hide, not to be in view of whoever might be out there, but after 5 minutes, I started to wonder if that was snow that fell off the roof and blew into the window. I got up to peek out the window. I screamed, because at first I thought what I saw was a person, but it was actually another snowman, standing right outside my window. There was an angry frown on this one instead of a smiling face. I screamed for my dad, and he came rushing inside. I pointed at the window, and this time, he wasn't happy. He said he would go next door in the morning and talk to the kid's parents. I slept in my sister's room the rest of the night. The next morning, my dad went next door and rang the bell, but they weren't home. There were no cars in the driveway. That meant they weren't even in town. That was the only nearby house with kids in it, so this didn't exactly help explain the situation. For 5 or 6 days straight, nothing else happened until Christmas Eve night. The rest of our immediate family, plus all 4 of our grandparents, were now in the house. We were in the living room. This was before dinner, but it was already dark out. Somebody knocked on the front door instead of using the doorbell. We weren't expecting any other family members. I started to get nervous. My dad went over and asked who it was, and someone on the other side of the door started saying, "Please let me in, I need your help." The door has no peephole or windows, nor are there any windows that would allow us to see who was on the other side of the door. My dad asked, "What's wrong?" And the voice on the other side said, "I have no one to spend Christmas with. Please help me." We all looked at each other now, and my dad yelled to please leave before we call the police. The person on the other side said, "Okay, I'll leave. Please don't call the police." He never opened the door. We instantly tied this to the creepy snowmen. We knew it had to be connected, and we were right. On Christmas morning, there was a note taped to our front door. It said, "To the best of my memory, I just wanted to have a little fun. I built the snowmen for the boy in the house. I don't have anyone to spend the holiday with. Hurt." In one way or another, I think whoever left that note on our door and built those 2 snowmen was mentally ill or unstable. It's very unlikely that it was meant to be a joke, considering he came to our front door. I think he was dangerous, and even if he wasn't inherently hostile, the fact that he did what he did is just enough for him to be considered somebody none of us wanted to meet. At the time of this story, I was young enough to be excited to see Santa Claus and still wanted my picture on his lap, but at the same time, I was old enough to know he wasn't real. My whole family was at Grandma's in Chapel Hill on the Friday after Thanksgiving. Our tradition was to go to the mall for all the sales to seek out deals on clothing and gifts. Black Friday is the beginning of the holiday shopping frenzy. As soon as we entered the main gallery of the mall, I saw Santa sitting in his chair with Christmas trees on both sides, and boxes of wrapped presents with big red bows. There were white reindeer with colored lights, and a sparkling snowman. Santa sat with rosy cheeks and a big smile, chuckling with children on his knee. He was the perfect Santa with a twinkle in his eye, even if it was a fake white beard that I could easily see. I was so excited, I screamed, "Santa! Mom, look, it's Santa! Can we get a picture?" She looked at the 10-mile-long line and said, "Maybe later, dear. If that line isn't too long, Let's shop now. We shopped all morning, had lunch at California Pizza Kitchen, a favorite place, and continued trying on clothes in the afternoon. I was so tired. We rested at the Cookie Company Crumble, where I had a snickerdoodle cupcake. So delicious. As we re-entered the mall, I saw Santa again. This time, there was no line at all. I begged my mom, "Please, let me tell Santa what I want for Christmas." We walked over, and my mom put $5 into the tip box held by a plastic elf. I ran up to Santa, and he grabbed me roughly around my arms and yanked me off my feet and onto his lap. He was squeezing me very uncomfortably and saying, "Cute little girl. Touch Santa. Let's smile." I looked up into his eyes. It wasn't the kindly red-cheeked Santa I had seen in the morning. The Santa had bloodshot eyes and stained, dirty brown cheeks under the fake Santa beard. His teeth were rotted, and his breath stunk like an outhouse. I tried to wiggle free, but he was holding me so tightly against his body. I looked at my mom, who was ready to take my picture with her iPhone. She saw my terror. She screamed, "Let my daughter go, you creep!" She grabbed my arm and pulled me from his grip. He fell to the floor in a drunken pool of saliva, his beard hanging around his neck. He staggered off, disappearing into the mall. The real Santa was found unconscious and stripped of his costume, having been mugged on his break. The fake Santa was never found. This is my chilling nightmare, and the reason I'm afraid of Santa.